Down goes Southern Cal. Down goes Florida. It's a rough week for contenders for the throne in college football. We're live at Campus Corner with the Oklahoman's pregame, sponsored by Big Red Sports and Imports. I'm Mike Sherman, sports editor of the Oklahoman. With me, OU beat writer Jake Trotter and columnist John Rohde. John, you shocked that Ole Miss went in and beat the Gators in the swamp?
I'm shocked that Mississippi was that bad this year and that good this year. Maybe coaching does make a difference. I thought OU was in the right frame of mind going into the game today against TCU. But there's no doubt about it now. When you got USC going down, Florida going down, you don't want to be the next one to go down.
There's an old saying that nothing clarifies the mind like gallows or hanging at noon. USC gets hung out to dry at Oregon State, way outplayed on the road. I think Oregon State outgained them 2-1. Today in the swamp, it sounded like Florida's kicking game really failed it. But these you can understand that the Oregon State game would be a trap game at Oregon State. But there's no traps at home, are there? Jake?
Evidently so. You looked at Florida's schedule, and you really couldn't find a loss. I couldn't find a loss on there, but it goes to show, I think we're in an age of college football where you almost have to assume that most people are going to lose at least one game. And Florida, Ohio State, USC are not out in the national championship race at all, because I think a lot more people are going to lose one, maybe two games. We saw LSU last year. They were a two-loss team that ended up winning the national title. I think with the scholarship limits, parity in college football, it's going to dictate that.
Let's talk about the task at hand for the Sooners. TCU tonight at 6 o'clock, kicking off on Fox Sports. Guys, everybody all week long has sort of talked about the 2005 game. Sooners start the season with an upset loss at home. It's their first game they play after the debacle in the Orange Bowl. Does 2005 and TCU matter at all tonight? John, you first.
Well, I think the mindset does, Mike, but that 2005 team was the laziest team that Stoops has had in his 10 years here. There's no doubt about it. They ended up 8-4. They actually turned it around late to finish at 8-4, and they got screwed over there in Texas Tech. But no, I think the mindset matters. But in terms of difference in talent and difference in how good this team is compared to the 2005 team, it's not even close in terms of OU.
Speaking of mindset, Jake, what at all do we know about OU's mindset coming into this game?
Well, speaking of what John was talking about, the guys that played in that TCU game, they were freshmen on the field for the very first time. They don't really have any memories other than what it was like to run through the tunnel and, getting on the field. I think they were just shocked to be out there. But I think the mindset of this team is good. Everyone you talk to say this is the most prepared, one of the best practice teams that Stoops has had, that there's a difference in this team between this season and last year. Everyone says that. So I guess that remains to be seen, but you have to like the mindset. They've gone out and hammered everybody home and away so far, which is something that they didn't do in their first road game last year.
John, we've spent a lot of time this season comparing this Sooner team to 2003. Last week, you brought out the 2004 comparison. Whichever one of those two teams we pick, those were seasoned teams, full of stars, full of weapons. My question to you is, as you look at 2005, it seemed like that was a starting over type season.
Yes, it was.
TCU faces an OU team with lots of established, top-notch college football players, making an upset, much harder this time.
Oh, yeah, they didn't know who their quarterback was 4 years ago or 3 years ago. They know who their quarterback is now, and you were talking about seasoned. If he can be seasoned after 1 year, Sam Bradford is it. His maturity is beyond belief. He has complete command in the huddle at the line of scrimmage. I've never seen the guy fluctuate in emotion. Jake, I think he's one of the top OU quarterbacks of all time by the time he's out of here.
Certainly, and the comparison that a lot of people like to make is Jason White. And Jason White wasn't doing this until his junior year, and he already had an extra year at that point anyway. So the fact that Bradford has done it so early in his career is what I think distinguishes himself not only from other OU quarterbacks, most of whom didn't play until they were juniors and seniors. Josh Heupel's another guy didn't play till he was a junior, but nationwide. I mean, Tim Tebow, we saw as a sophomore have a pretty incredible run, but name some other freshman, sophomore quarterbacks that have done what Sam Bradford, namely lead the nation in passing efficiency his first 2 years in college.
I want to come back to that Tim Tebow, Sam Bradford comparison in a minute as we sort of talk about what the impact of Florida's loss is, both on the national title race and on the Heisman race. But first, I want to address a question from News OK, from Brian on News OK, who's really asking a similar question we've been talking about. He asked, is there any chance OU overlooks TCU today based on what happened with Ole Miss in Florida? But my question is, as you watch the game tonight, what will be some telltale signs, maybe, Jake, that OU might be overlooking them? What do you look for as you watch a football game? What kind of things do you see in a heavy favorite that tells you maybe they're not, maybe they're looking past this opponent?
Well, sluggishness, penalties, offensive penalties, false starts, things like that. But honestly, we haven't seen Oklahoma do that at all this year. They've taken it to everybody they played. So, turnovers maybe would be another thing, but maybe missed tackles. But, I don't see it. I think this Oklahoma team is not going to overlook TCU. I think they realize that this is a ball club that came to Norman 3 years ago and won, and I think that's been emphasized this week by Coach Stoops.
Really, if you can't get some motivation out of that, what can you get motivation out of? But, John, let's go back to the sort of hypnotic topic that everybody will want to talk about, which is who's number one. And let's look at tonight's games, both here in Norman and in Athens, Georgia. And my question is, if Georgia goes out and wins at home against Alabama, what's their case for number one when the polls come out on Sunday?
Well, I think if Georgia goes out and wins tonight, they are number one, and they should be number one. Even if it's a 30-point game here and a 4 or 5 point game there, I think Georgia will win out. I think it'll be real close, but I think Georgia will be the new number one if it wins.
I see that argument, but does it matter now? I mean, who cares, really? It's going to matter.
Hey, in 1 week, it proved it didn't matter. We are such good journalists. We got that whole if everybody goes unbeaten thing out of the way. So we've already done.
We ran it Wednesday.
We beat our deadline.
Yeah.
So it's now an obsolete story, but we've already written it.
I think it goes to show you really can't even predict anything that's going to happen. Who would have thought Ole Miss would have knocked Florida out today?
Now wait a minute. I want to bring this undefeated thing back in play here, but just because the team in Southeast Conference goes out and USC goes out, hold on for a second. I think we have somewhat of an elimination games between the Big 12 and the SEC, and I'll throw the Big 10 in there too, because Wisconsin's playing today against Michigan.
They're killing Michigan. They're killing them right now.
Well, that's a game Wisconsin should win. They've got big games coming up. Wisconsin's got a big game against Penn State. They can earn their way into this picture too. My question to you guys is, let's not write off this idea that we're going to have a couple or 3 undefeated teams at the end of this season just yet. Jake, what about that?
Well, I think you look at the 2000 Oklahoma team, I think we realized how special that season was. For them to go in the month of October and beat Texas, who was, 10th at the time, Kansas State on the road, who was
number 2,
third,
I think.
Yeah, and then Nebraska, who was number 1 in Norman. I mean, that was an incredible run. And then to survive Texas A&M, to survive Oklahoma State, we're not going to see many runs like that in college football anymore. And I think it goes to show how special that 2000 team was. I mean, I think you're kidding yourself if you think you're going to have an undefeated SEC team. All those teams play incredible schedules week to week, and even an Ole Miss can go to the Swamp and win a game like they did today.
Joining us right now on a set at the Oklahoman's pregame live, sponsored by Big Red Sports and Imports, our man John Helsley. John, thanks for showing up. You're joining the discussion about who's number one. Down goes Florida today. Don't know if you heard it, but the Gators lose at home in the Swamp to Ole Miss and Houston Nutt, who, my friend Matt Clayton, the big Notre Dame fan and the big Arkansas fan, says Houston Nutt's going to be the next Notre Dame coach. A big win like this sure doesn't hurt. John, but what we're talking about is this. Who's most worthy for the throne next? Oklahoma plays tonight against TCU. The Sooners are ranked number 2. And a win seems to make their case. They're next in line at the cafeteria.
Well, yeah, I think the Sooners are definitely next in line. But just from hearing a little bit of what you guys were talking about, I don't think anybody's going to finish unbeaten. I think we're going to have a repeat of last year where everybody's got a loss, or may have somebody with a couple of them. I don't think this is a one-year blip a year ago. I think this is the way life is in college football right now.
Well, I was looking at the schedules today, guys, and I was kind of charting it out, looking at tough games and trap games. And the two unbeaten teams in the top 10 that have lost this week, USC and Florida, One lost a trap game. I think you can call the Oregon State a trap game. But is it a trap game when you lose at home like Florida did?
No, it hurts twice as much. And here's the deal. They won at Tennessee. Tennessee's no good, but nobody really knew that last week. Florida wins that one. That was one of their 2 toughest games on the road. So they come back home thinking, all right, we got Ole Miss. They're whatever, 1-2, 2-2. We'll jump on them, and it backfired.
Taking this back to, okay, I'll adopt your guys' theory that there's not going to be 2 unbeaten teams in here. That really means that USC is going to sit on the sidelines for a while and percolate back up to the top, doesn't it?
Well, they're going to have to beat somebody good to get back to the top, but I'm not sure who that is.
They don't, well, unless they add some games onto their schedule that are not currently scheduled, I really don't see them.
Team to watch is Ohio State. That's the team to keep an eye on. They lost early in the year. They got a quarterback change, which I think will change the perception of what people have of that team. And if they go to Wisconsin and win and they beat Penn State and Columbus, I think that Ohio State, a one-loss Ohio State, is the team you got to consider.
Voters will be very skeptical.
Yeah, probably.
They've bitten that the last 2 years and been sorry for it.
Yep.
You're talking about Ohio State's performances in January, not in December, right?
Right.
I mean, do you think that kind of thing really matters, John?
Yeah, timing is everything. You bet.
No, I'm talking about people feeling like Ohio State fell flat on its face in January against LSU, the previous year against Florida. And do you think people will be reluctant to vote say the Buckeyes rehabilitate themselves, Terrell Pryor becomes the quarterback they hope he can be, and they get back in the picture with a big win at Wisconsin? Will people be reluctant to vote Ohio State number one because they've had bad Januaries 2 previous Januaries?
Well, here's the deal. The 2 polls that matter, the 2 human polls that matter, are a bunch of retired guys, 200 retired guys who have their biases, and coaches who have it in their contract if they make it a BCS poll. You don't have the writers involved anymore. We may be ignorant, but we're not biased. There's a big difference there. I would rather have the AP poll in there and have it count as a third. So, yeah, I think people will have that on their mind. I hope not. Every year is different. Just like Tebow and the Heisman. I hope they've forgotten last year because if he's in their top 5 right now, after today especially, take away their vote. That shouldn't be that way.
And you know who got a big bump from Florida losing today? Because Tebow hadn't played as well as he did last year, at least statistically. The guy who got a big bump is Sam Bradford in terms of the Heisman race, because now you look at it, who is in the Heisman race? Chase Daniel, Sam Bradford, name the third guy. Javon Ringer, Michigan State. I mean,
Max Hall.
Not to bring up sore subjects, but each of us I know had picked a Heisman favorite when the season started, and I was just going to go down the line and ask you, who was your pick for the Heisman before the season started, John?
Jeremy Maclin, still my pick.
Still standing strong. Jake?
Tebow. Had to go Tebow, didn't you?
I don't know.
No, you didn't. Take away your vote.
You be the judge. I picked Beanie Wells.
How's that going?
Not so good. John?
I was with Jake on the Tebow train.
Great minds think alike.
So 1 out of 4. And Jeremy Maclin is not going to win for 2 reasons. 1, he plays wide receiver.
The right pick never wins.
And 2, he's going to split votes with Chase Daniel. If he has a good season, he's doomed to split votes with Chase, just the way Adrian Peterson split him with Jason White.
Well, what if Missouri finishes 1-2?
I don't know. I think it's a long shot. Okay,
Yeah.
We get to redraw right now. Your Heisman favorite right now. We'll go down the same line. John, you staying? You're going to stay?
No, I'm going to still vote for the same guy. He may not win, but I'm still voting for him.
Jake?
How about no Sean Marino? How about Georgia's tailback?
We'll know tonight, won't we? John?
I'm going to go Chase Daniel today.
Is that who you're voting for, or is that who you think will win?
I think that's who I would vote for
Missouri's
today.
got to go to Austin, and that if they win that game, then I think you have to look at Daniel. If they lose that game, I think that knocks him out for a little bit.
Well, here's what I'm going to say. I think the last game the Sooners played made me convinced that Sam Bradford is not just he had a good freshman year candidate for the Heisman. I think he's a legitimate get-to-go to New York City candidate for the Heisman. And what convinced me is what you guys wrote about, how he played on the road. That's the true mark of a great quarterback, putting up big numbers and doing it on the road. I don't care that Washington Huskies are scuffling. I don't care that Ty's on his way out. What I think Bradford's performance, and I'm going to go with Sam. I think he's got enough big games ahead of him that he can put out his mark, and I also think he doesn't have too many big games ahead of him where he's going to get beat up in the SEC like somebody else. So
you know what? It's going to help Sam a lot is I think Tebow opened up the door for people to vote for sophomores. In the past, people wouldn't vote for young players simply because they were young. I think Tebow knocked down that door. That's going to clear the way for Bradford. It may not work against him as much as it would have in the past.
Guys, Tim Tebow knocked down a couple doors last year. One, he won it as a sophomore. Two, he won it as quarterback of a team with multiple losses. So that's not going to hurt you. Didn't Florida lose twice last year?
I think they lost 4 times, didn't they?
Yeah. Well, 4 times. So what I'm saying is, it used to be that the Heisman Trophy race was something that really was tied to the national championship race. It was also tied to the idea that you have to be maybe the best player on the best team. Not the case last year. We don't know who the best. So let me ask you this. Are we closer to knowing who the best player in the country is than we are to knowing what the best team in the country is? John.
Well, here's the deal with the Heisman. They should just say it should go to the top offensive player on the top team, because it's come down to that. Unfortunately, defensive people don't post good numbers anymore. Sure, all these wide open offenses, defense rarely excels individually or as teams. The linebacker for USC who got hurt the other night, he was terrific. Nobody even mentions him for the Heisman. So. Yeah, it'll get you the best player on the best offensive team is what it'll get you.
Charles Woodson blew it for everybody. He made the Heisman gods mad by winning it the year that Peyton Manning should have won it, and it probably boxed defensive players out of it for a long time. Is there a defensive player, though, out there in your guys' mind that really merits it? Somebody who really we ought to look out for, like a Charles Woodson, like a George Webster of the 60s? Is there a dominant defensive player that we should be throwing his name into the Heisman discussion?
Well, if South Florida is 10-0, you got to look at George Selvey if he's leading the nation in sacks, which I think he will anyway. Off the top of my mind, that's the only guy I can think of.
Yeah,
that doesn't ring many bells for me.
Laurinaitis might have been one of those kind of guys, but the way they got beat, the way they got beat, it kind of removed him from the situation.
was doing fine. I don't know what his injury is, but Maluga was doing great, but he still wasn't getting mentioned.
A lot of teams also they're not playing for defensive stardom. The other thing that I think is hurting defensive players in this day and age is the spread. You don't have dominant defensive linemen racking up tons of sacks. Everybody's sort of playing back and trying not to give up the home run. And all these spread offenses, the Big 12, the best defensive teams in the Big 12 are giving up 21 points a game and 300 yards a game. So that's not really blowing anybody away from a statistical standpoint either. Let's shift gears to TCU. Guys, a question. What should scare the Sooners about TCU? And I'll start with you, John.
Discipline. They've only had 1 turnover in 4 games. They've had 1 pick, no fumbles, well coached. Been here before. They've been here 5 times, won 4 games. These guys haven't. They weren't around in 45, I don't think. But they have nothing to lose. This is their chance to prove themselves. And so I think it's just the soundness of TCU, their discipline.
Jake?
Maybe TCU exposing Oklahoma running the ball. TCU's got the best rush defense in the country statistically. If OU can't run the ball at all today, even if the Sooners win, I think that's going to raise some concerns. They need to be able to establish the run, Chris Brown, DeMarco Murray, and if they do that, I think it's going to make it really difficult for TCU to stop them.
John, is there a who to that question? Is there somebody on TCU, some player that should scare or concern the Sooners?
Well, the 2 defensive ends are really good players, and if those guys can get a pass rush going, get to Sam Bradford, maybe, beat him around a little bit, it could be interesting. I really don't expect that. I think TCU is a pretty good defensive team. I have a hard time seeing how they're going to score many points today without a lot of help.
How about a BCS buster for TCU? Is this the game? Is this their only chance to be the team in the BCS from the Mountain West? They got to win today.
Absolutely. There are no one-loss non-BCS teams that factor in. You better be unbeaten if you want to play in that game.
Couldn't there be a situation where they have a bunch of one-loss teams and the best of the bunch gets it?
I think there's a possibility that if they lose today, respectively, and they beat up BYU at home and they win at Utah, and they're a one-loss Mountain West, I think they could sneak into the BCS.
Their computer rating will be good enough.
I asked that question because as the computer, feeding quality wins into the computer becomes important for OU. What TCU does down the road really does matter to the Sooners. Jake, you wrote about that today. So if they go on, they got a big game against BYU coming up. They go win that game. What can this win do for the Sooners?
Well, I think if you go down the line and let's say Oklahoma stumbles at some point, and obviously Florida has stumbled and USC has and Ohio State has, and let's say Georgia loses at some point, it comes down to all those teams. Then you looked at, well, who is who beaten, who's your best loss, etc. And if TCU can come back and win the Mountain West Conference after this, that's going to be maybe a top 15 BCS win for Oklahoma. It's going to look really nice on their resume. And it's one of those deals where the Big 12 schedule is already going to be really good for Oklahoma with Tech and Texas. Texas looks really good this year. Missouri's a top 5 ball club. Kansas is a top 20 team. Oklahoma State might be ranked by the end of this week. So that's just another win that they're going to have, and they're going to need it if they're going to be compared with the team from the SEC.
This game can do a lot more tonight than it could at 8 a.m. this morning because of Florida. Now the upset watch is on. Everybody's looking now who else is going down, so a lot more eyes will be on this game tonight now to see if maybe Oklahoma can be the next team to go down. And if they win and win impressively, I just think it shows that many more people how good they are.
Yeah, in other words, on the day that Florida loses at home to Ole Miss, and OU win at home against TCU looks even better.
Wasn't Oklahoma the first big team to lose last year? Because won it the next week that USC lost.
I think Texas and Oklahoma lost on the same day.
Didn't they lose on this week?
No,
was it in October? I thought it was on this weekend.
It would have been the next weekend.
Right, it was the week before they met.
A week before Texas, you're right. It was next weekend, 1 year anniversary of that loss. So that, to me, this is, this makes the TCU game more important and makes the Sooners look even better if they come out of it. But if you're in the TCU preparations, if you're at their pregame meal, their walkthroughs and all that stuff, you think they've got the TV on? You think they know that Florida's gone down? Are they evoking anybody can lose? If Ole Miss can win at the Swamp, we can win in Norman?
Well, sure. I mean, I think, like I said before, I think OU's mind was right where it needed to be, especially after Thursday night, and even more so after today. They were saying doing all the right things before USC went down Thursday, and TCU was saying and doing all the right things before that happened too. I just don't see this game in terms of a mindset being an issue for either team.
Okay, guys, real quick, as you look at the Sooners, they're coming off a bye week. Who are the Sooner players that you feel like will be, one, a key to this game, and two, somebody you think is really going to step up and have an outstanding game? John, I'll start with you.
Well, I wrote a little bit about it today, but DeMarco Murray's a guy I want to look at. Jake mentioned TCU's great run defense. He's a guy who really hadn't gotten it going yet. I think it'd be interesting to see if they can get him going in the running game. I think it's important for him to get him going.
Jake?
I'll go with Chris Brown because this might be a game where you're not going to break 80 and 70 against this team. You might have to take 5 and 6, and I think Chris Brown's your best running back for that kind of scheme. And I asked him this past week, you think you're faster because you look faster? And he said, I feel faster. And he's coming off knee surgery, which is kind of a weird deal to see a guy come back and be a step faster. But he looks really sharp through the non-conference so far.
John, who are you looking at?
Kevin Wilson. I think it's his game to really have OU impose its will, so to speak. They are going against the number 1 rush defense, and they want to. These guys touched on it all week long. They're exactly right. They're going to show what they can do best, and they're not going to. It's going to be smash mouth for OU. I think that's the approach they're going to take today.
I'm interested to see what Gerald McCoy does. Without DeMarcus Granger, Gerald is, got some really good defensive tackles, but the guy was dominant in Washington and really looked like. I mean, if he had a couple more games like the Washington game, we might be talking about him being one of these defenders that jumps into big-time postseason talk. I'm going to be really interested to see how Gerald plays tonight with Granger out, how much of a factor not having that defensive tackle run stuff and Buddy there and to cave in the pocket, whether that makes a big difference for Gerald, whether it makes a big difference for the OU defense. I'll be interested to see that. Guys, anything else on your minds as we close?
No, I think we covered it all.
Water? Got any water? It's 119 degrees out here.
That's all for us from the Big Red Sports and Imports
And I wore black.
Pre-game from the Oklahoman. Be sure to keep up with us. Follow all the news from the state's best coverage team covering Oklahoma football on newsok.com, newsok.tv, and every day in the Oklahoman.